Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, March the 30th, 2021. Hello to Gabion, Visionary Companion, and Dawn from Beyond. I thought I'd start today by talking about Kamala Harris. She's always laughing in a near maniacal manner. Have you noticed that? I wondered why. Is it because she is just such a joyous person, or is there something else at play? It's a piece today from Andrea Whitberg at American Thinker, The Meaning Behind Kamala's Cackle. Video emerged of Kamala Harris recently speaking about the problems parents face when their schools are closed, but they can't afford childcare. This is a serious issue with massive repercussions for children's development and for working mothers. So what did Kamala do? She cracked herself up, laughing so hard she could barely get the words out. What the heck is going on with that woman? Andrea Whitberg provides the video so that you can see that she is not exaggerating. For some reason, Harris finds it inordinately funny that parents and children are suffering, even as she backs away compulsively from her audience. This is not the first time we've seen Kamala laugh uncontrollably and inappropriately. A few more examples show that it's a go-to behavior for her. For example, when Stephen Colbert asked Kamala ever so delicately how she could accept the offer to become Biden's vice president when she'd agreed that he probably sexually molested someone, Kamala couldn't stop laughing. Kamala also thought it was hysterically funny that people are suffering along the southern border now that the Biden administration has thrown aside America's immigration laws. And there's a video attached here of Kamala Harris laughing when asked if she has any plans to visit the border. Kamala also couldn't stop laughing when asked if she was. And then there was the time in 2018 when Kamala thought it funny to joke about killing Republicans, including Trump and Pence. A joke that, were any other person to make it, would earn a knock of nervous laughter in the 1960s. His study revealed that people often laugh nervously in uncomfortable situations. People in his study were asked to give electric shocks to a stranger, with the shocks becoming increasingly powerful, up to 450 volts. But the strangers in this case were researchers involved in the study. They weren't actually being shocked. But participants were more likely to laugh at the violence of the situation the higher the volts went. Neuroscientist V.M. Ramachandran explored this idea in his book, A Brief Tour of Human Consciousness. He proposes that laughter first appeared in human history as a way to indicate to those around us that whatever was making us laugh wasn't a threat or worth worrying about. So we're essentially reassuring ourselves that whatever's making us uncomfortable isn't that big a deal when we laugh in an uncomfortable situation. The question then is, what is making Harris nervous when she A, glosses over willingly campaigning with someone she accused of sexual assault, or B, jokes about killing the president, or C, laughs at suffering working parents experience when their children cannot go to school? My guess is that the laughter came about for the following reasons: A, acknowledging that she has no moral compass and was caught in a lie; B, knowing she violated a social and legal taboo; and C, knowing that her administration policies not only aren't helping, but are also making it worse. And Andrea Whitberg concludes this piece with, that is, in every case, Kamala laughs because she's doing something even she knows is bad and wrong. I guess it shows she has some semblance of a conscience and therefore isn't a true sociopath. Imagine, though, when she inevitably takes over for Biden and is responsible for dealing with foreign governments. She's going to be a disaster, signaling loudly to her opponents, Putin, Z, the mullahs, that she's lying, doing something wrong, or is about to make things much worse. There's another possibility here, which is that Kamala Harris is simply profoundly shallow. This is a woman who, well, here's another example of her laughing. Joe Biden likes ice cream. Well, as I've joked before, Kamala Harris didn't grow up in the United States, so perhaps she doesn't know that many Americans love ice cream. Of course, many Canadians love ice cream as well. That's where Kamala Harris grew up. But why is this so funny? Oh, Joe Biden, he's just nuts about ice cream. So it's not funny. That's not even close to being funny. This is a woman who carried on about her running shoes, what her Converses and how they define us. That statement is completely fatuous. Running shoes do not define anyone unless they're the kind of people, typically people without a lot of resources who's, it's all there in the running shoes. I scrape together every cent I can and, for a pair of overpriced running shoes. But no, to someone like Kamala Harris, who's expected to be a serious person, no, her running shoes cannot possibly define her unless, of course, she is so profoundly shallow as to believe that. This is a woman who thought it was amusing to talk about smoking marijuana while listening to Tupac Shakur. Oh, didn't your office put people in California in prison for marijuana possession? And you're joking about this during a presidential election? Yes, and Tupac Shakur, certainly a role model to Americans, young and old. But did she actually ever listen to Tupac Shakur? Does she even know who Tupac Shakur was? I ask this because it turns out the story about the date that she gave when she was listening to Tupac Shakur and smoking dope, well, Tupac hadn't put out his first album yet. Later, during the campaign, when she asked who her favorite current rapper was, she said Tupac Shakur. One does not need to be particularly well-versed in the world of rap to know that Tupac Shakur was shot to death quite some time ago. But I'm going to return to this question of the lack of seriousness in female leaders. We're always putting themselves first, their personalities first. Here's a story about another female leader in the United States, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. Paul Bradford writes about her in American Greatness. She claims she's a victim of conservative cancel culture. After vetoing a popular bill to defend women's sports from the transgender lobby, Noem insists she did no such thing. She claims she only rejected the bill because legendary but unnamed conservative legal scholars told her she would lose a fight with the National Collegiate Athletic Association. If any number of conservative pundits are to be believed, that same governor who refused to cave is now caving to the NCAA and Amazon on the issue of fairness in women's sports. What? Apparently, uniform cancel culture is fine when the right is eating their own, Noem spokesman Ian Fury said in a press statement. Furthermore, the bill picked a fight with the NCAA. Ooh, scary. A fight that renowned conservative legal experts advise Governor Noem that she will lose, especially considering South Dakota's unfriendly federal bench. Apparently, if the NCAA threatens a lawsuit, you get a pass to betray your constituents. We just can't expect our lawmakers to fight for our interests in court. Just sign Noem's Defend Title IX petition so she can harvest your info when it comes time to raise money for her next campaign. That's how you win. It should also be noted Noem is staking her political future defending a liberal statute that has gutted collegiate male sports. Yes, as the coach on King of the Hill once said, Title IX, Dick Nixon's biggest mistake. The article continues, the governor's damage control is not likely to work as conservatives continue to mock her for capitulating to corporate interests. Her first brush with criticism from conservative media doesn't augur well for her presidential hopes. She demonstrated she will surrender rather than fight on the controversial issues. How can we expect her to stand up for middle Americans in the Oval Office? Amazon and the NCAA matter more to her than her own voters do. What really distinguishes her as suspect is her use of the cancel culture defense. It's expected for politicians to face tough criticism for their decisions. It's part of the job. The worst Republicans have decided, however, the usual criticism from the right is something unprecedented. In reality, it's cancel culture to excoriate elected representatives when they vote the wrong way. This asinine argument is used to defect from blame and shame ordinary Americans for daring to criticize Republicans. The only way to avoid cancel culture is to say nothing when your elected representatives do something stupid. Many prominent Republicans shrieked cancel culture back in the faces on the right when defending those who voted to impeach Donald Trump. GOP House Caucus Chair Liz Cheney allegedly was a victim of right-wing cancel culture for supporting impeachment and disparaging Trump and his voters. Yes, what do Noam and Liz Cheney have in common? They're both women. You may have noticed that with female politicians or female journalists or female celebrities or just women, and of course there are exceptions to this, that they regard all criticism as a personal affront, an outrage even. How dare you? Or as we saw with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because there was some unpleasantness going on hundreds of yards from her office, she said that she nearly lost her life that way. One woman who is not about to just roll over and play dead is Sharon Osbourne. Now, let me just run you through how this happened. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, otherwise known as Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz, made some very controversial claims about the British royal family. And a lot of people took exception to these claims, saying in response that unlikely at best, impossible at worst. For instance, their claim that they were actually married 3 days before they were actually married, which is not legal under Church of England rules. And why would anyone, if you're going to get the wedding of a lifetime laid on by the British taxpayer, why would you want some private little ceremony in a garden? But a British TV host named Piers Morgan accused the Mertzes of telling lies, whereupon he was excoriated essentially for criticizing a black woman. Couldn't possibly understand about racism, et cetera, et cetera. And so he left the show Good Morning Britain. Now, Sharon Osbourne, who, of course, married to Ozzy Osbourne, was manager of Black Sabbath, later became a panel show, reality show star, and has worked with Piers Morgan, defended Piers Morgan on a show called The Talk, whereupon she was excoriated for disagreeing with a black woman. And all of these rats scurried up to say, oh, yes, she's been saying terrible, terrible things about minorities for the longest time. Well, Sharon Osbourne is no fool. According to the Daily Mail, she will receive a $5 to $10 million payout from CBS following news that she was preparing to sue the network after she was forced to quit its flagship chat show, The Talk, for defending Piers Morgan. Osbourne's exit agreement also leaves her free to talk about her controversial departure, according to another insider who said Sharon will talk when she is ready. She still wants to give her side of the story. She has been on that show for 11 years and knows all the secrets. It seems Sharon was able to negotiate the cushy farewell terms after threatening legal action. The Mail on Sunday previously reported that the 68-year-old was planning to take the broadcaster all the way for damages over her departure from The Talk, which was announced Friday. Allegations later emerged that Osbourne had made racist remarks about her co-host behind the scenes, a claim she has denied strenuously. Now, get this. In a statement confirming her departure, CBS said, as part of our review, we concluded that Sharon's behavior toward her co-host during the March 10th episode did not align with our values for respectful workplace. Women on that show, well, women who are deemed to be right-wing or not sufficiently woke enough, are screamed down and humiliated on a regular basis. Piers Morgan has branded CBS a disgrace over the network's treatment of Sharon Osbourne after she defended him after saying he didn't believe Megan Mertz was suicidal during her Oprah Winfrey interview. He said, bullied out of her job for defending me against an invented slur of racism because I don't believe a liar. Well, yes. I mean, Megan Mertz is black, or kind of, sort of black. So she cannot be gainsayed. Just can't be done. Can't be done. The talk, which has been on hiatus since March the 12th, in the aftermath of the controversy, will return April 12th, but without the sharp-tongued Osbourne. Sharon Osbourne has decided to leave the talk, CBS said in a statement. The events of the March 10 broadcast were upsetting to everyone involved, including the audience watching at home. People watch that show to see women go spare, to level insults at other people. That is the reason. CBS, they're going through a lemon session, as Tom Wolfe would say. We also did not find any evidence that CBS executives orchestrated the discussion or blindsided any of the hosts, because that never happens on shows like this. At the same time, we acknowledge the network and studio teams, as well as the showrunners, are accountable for what happened during that broadcast, as it was clear the co-hosts were not properly prepared by the staff for a complex and sensitive discussion involving race, because that's what you get on The Talk and The View and other such shows, are complex and sensitive discussions involving race or other serious issues. During this week's hiatus, we are coordinating workshops, listening sessions, and training about equity, inclusion, and cultural awareness for the hosts, producers, and crew. Going forward, we are identifying plans to enhance the producing staff and producing procedures to better serve the hosts, the production, and ultimately our viewers. You would think, given by the way that CBS talks about this, that I don't know, that Sharon Osbourne had beaten up a 68-year-old Asian woman on the show, something like that, or some other horrific thing had happened. No, Sharon Osbourne got a little heated when she disagreed with a black woman. And CBS goes into a meltdown as a result of this. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Palcasso88 and William Hicks. She wasn't doing any laughing during the Kavanaugh hearing, says Jim Smith. Hello to Chad Chatson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. Palcasso88 says she's laughing because she's evil. Chogokin666 says, my theory on black on Asian attacks, one, they have always been occurring. Media organs told to hype it up. Two, okay, I'm not going to say that one. No, as I've mentioned previously, this animosity between blacks and Asians in the United States is long-standing. And if you read the news, as I do, and I know others do, you know, these attacks of both verbal and physical have been a commonplace for quite a few years. Long before George Floyd, long before COVID-19, long before Trump came to office. Mary Crow says, finished Peter Kemp's book on the Spanish Civil War. Great page turner, rises above journalism into literature. Thank you for reviewing a great book I knew nothing about. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Does anybody remember laughter, says MF Superstar. That's a Robert Plant line that occurred in the Cameron Crowe movie about the rock biz. A little disguised autobiography, Almost Famous. One of my favorite movies, actually. Emma Superstar says, we are what shoes we wear. Some cultures judge people by their shoes. Jokin666 says, Tariq Nasheed posits that these are paid false flag actors beating the living crap out of randos. Yeah, I don't think so. Jim Smith does not like Converses and does not think that they are good running shoes. Okay, joke about Tupac Shakur. Hello to G's He Style. Megan Mertz will be Kamala's running mate in 2028. Laugh now, says MF Superstar. Oh, you must have seen the rumors that she's looking for a Senate appointment, something like that. I wouldn't trust that woman to run a lemonade stand. I mean, senators or legislators. They're not in the executive. Metal Mike says, hi, KMG. What do you think of Doug Ford telling people today don't make plans for Easter? I would tell him to mind his own business. But, you know, in the wake of the churches in Ontario pretty much surrendering and packing up shop, where's the resistance? Where's the resistance to this? Who should replace Sharon Osbourne? Ann Coulter, Caitlyn Jenner. They never have anyone like Ann Coulter on one of these shows because Ann Coulter is simply not going to sit there and be humiliated by a bunch of dummies. Star Rover says, Noam objected to lumping K-12 and college students in one transgender bill. She issued 2 executive orders. K-12 and college girls sports are limited to biological females in the orders. Hello to you, Professor Paul. Gamian says she's laughing because she is uncomfortable. She knows she doesn't belong where she is. Well, I suffer from the nervous laughter myself. I always have. I remember I got in big trouble when I was in high school because in guidance class, some jerk from the St. John's ambulance showed up and started telling us blood-curdling stories of injuries that he had seen. Just really grotesque stuff. You know, he wanted to make our skin crawl, and I started laughing nervously. And he yelled at me, and it was one of those situations where I thought, what who's he yelling at? Oh, he's yelling at me. Well, you think this is funny, do you? No, I don't. Then why are you laughing? Because it makes me nervous, these terrible tales you're telling. And then he demanded that I perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on one of these dummies he'd brought in. And I said, no, I wasn't going to do that. I was mass shamed yesterday. Luckily, I was not on the ale, says Roulette Cracked. A complete stranger, member of the public, telling me I had to wear a mask. I said, actually, you should be wearing these masks on a plastic face shield. He was only wearing the mask. Nervous laughter reminds me of a Full Metal Jacket scene, says MF Superstar. 17 degrees Celsius and balmy in Ottawa today. Young people wearing 2 masks in the fresh air. Insane. Well, it is insane with no end in sight. But I say that, no end in sight. These things have a habit of changing quickly. You know, one day people wake up and they say, you know, we're sick of this. We're not going to do this anymore. Interesting story in the American Sun yesterday from someone who calls himself or herself Super Lutheran. And it is entitled, Does Your Nationalism Suck? Why do we lose? Nationalism keeps losing. I'm not just talking about ethno-nationalism with the embarrassing failures of the movement and the widespread frustrations. Civic nationalism keeps losing. National Bolshevism keeps losing. Southern nationalism keeps losing. We spent the entirety of the 20th century watching various factions in the West fail to have any semblance of a coherent nation state, which sees its own people as its first or only priority. Even in cases like Ireland, the struggle for independence was won only to see a severe degradation, including open borders and demographic displacement, championed by the very people who once fought bravely for their homeland. Why is this? You might point to the power imbalance that the world system uses hard power to stop nationalism, All cultural, governmental, and societal institutions are oriented against us. Let's call this problem A. Ever since the Second World War, nationalism has been the great enemy of today's world order, and both the Western and Soviet powers worked tirelessly to crush it. When the West won the Cold War, the greatest effort has been taken to prevent any sort of revival of nationalism over all other issues. Problem A ensures that there is no self-adhere principle that the system will not break in order to make sure that nationalism loses. It is public enemy number one, precisely because it remains the only threat to the system. So we're the underdogs because of problem A. Sure. I would say that after the Second World War, it was decided that no alternative elite would be allowed. In fact, that politics was over. Everyone was liberal democratic now. You just got various flavors of it. Essentially, all of the politicians believed in the same things. Nationalism, patriotism, even. Politics itself was thought to be deadly. We can't have politics as they have been traditionally understood because politics leads to mass destruction and genocide. And that's the rule today. That is why Donald Trump was considered to be unacceptable, because Donald Trump actually differed in his beliefs. And he actually believed in putting Americans first, which for some reason is wicked. Now, the neocons who opposed Trump, they were at the head of the Never Trumpers, they find that there is nothing wrong. In fact, it's admirable to just bomb people to death, to destroy their infrastructure all over the world and claim that it's for their own good. And then, of course, inviting the survivors to come to America because they would never hold a grudge. But putting Americans first, why, that's wicked. It's more wicked than, killing hundreds of thousands, killing millions of people abroad to no end, actually, which makes it worse. Anyway, our essayist says, you might point to the power imbalance that the world system uses hard power to stop nationalism. Yes. To be honest with you, I'm not convinced this would be a big of an obstacle to us if nationalists stop poisoning their own ideologies with the absolute worst motivations, opinion strategies, and utter delusions. We could have a great amount of success, even if only on the small scale at first, if we only had avoided the problems brought on by toxic personalities and addiction to loss. In other words, nationalism keeps losing because most people's nationalism sucks. And he has a questionnaire here. Does my nationalism suck? Question 1, is my nationalism based on hatred? Maybe someone is reading this and having a knee-jerk allergic reaction to it. Hatred is a stupid made-up term used by the insert people you hate here to avoid accountability for their actions. Besides, hatred for the enemy is the flip side of love for our own people. But is that really the case? Let me posit to you that hatred is the dumbest, most time-consuming mindset you can have. It takes away a positive vision for your ideology, makes you repugnant to everyone, and retards your ability to function. Question 2, am I edgy for the sake of being edgy? Well, are you? Then your edgy version of nationalism sucks. It might sound like I'm repeating the first question, but this goes a bit deeper. The right has accurately called out virtue signaling for what it is and regularly takes people down for their shallow, stupid opinions that always amount to, look at how good a person I am, you should like me more. But over the case of time, edgy signaling replaced it. The normie virtue signals, I put a black square on my Instagram account to say Black Lives Matter. The edgy poster signals with the Holocaust didn't happen, but I wish it did. It is one thing to hold an opinion about supposed historical events, is quite another to loudly proclaim in the most obnoxious way whatever you think is the most heinous thing you could say. Question 3, am I just a wimp? Many in our circle came to it through the urgent desire for safety. Our crowd expanded sharply as the European migrant crisis came into the public eye, as FBI crime statistics were published everywhere, and Donald Trump's comments were accurate. Someone's doing the raping. We were confronted in our forums with compilation videos of insert racial, ethnic, foreign group here being violent towards Americans, Trump supporters, whites, women, and so forth, and suddenly we got pretty scared. The normal solution offered by the nationalists was to kick the offending groups out. Pretty reasonable, right? There's nothing wrong with this notion per se, but there is a point in which it shows a loser mentality, even an implicit weakness. We have to kick this element out of the nation because the natives like peace is often code for this violence demonstrates how weak my people are. This sentiment is woven into statements for the need for some nice white country. Look, I get it. No one likes to see a lot of violence, but if your entire opposition to diversity rests on other races are mean, and I want to be far away from the meanies, then you are admitting your nationalism is for limp-wristed weaklings. Nationalists, if you have a problem with the violence you're seeing, then learn to defend yourself, spar often, and be ready. But they're unfair, and they hunt in packs. Then go out in groups. We aren't getting out of this mess anytime soon. Now is the time to get tough and teach your people to be tough. If you're worried that at some point self-defense is going to be outlawed, then put space in your head that you might go to prison or have to be on the run. Come up with a plan instead of insisting that we have a safe nation right now. Again, problem A has made it pretty inconceivable that we'll get our way anytime soon, and I'm not advocating learning violence in order to go to war with the well-armed and well-funded clown world, but you must adjust your lifestyle and embrace self-hardening to survive on the street level. Question 4, am I just a picky liberal? This is not a larger problem regarding our crowd these days as it used to be, but it is still around. If your conception of nationalism is liberalism, but only for your people, your nationalism sucks. When the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, I recall so many people lamenting that these were our homosexuals, and this foreigner came in and killed them. How dare he? Of course, a year prior, we were all complaining about how the Supreme Court's decision to force legalization of gay marriage everywhere was a sign of America's total moral collapse. It still happens to some extent today. We cry like conservatives at how unconstitutional the left behaves when it has power, soon after complaining about how the Constitution gave our enemies room to destroy the nation. People aren't mad about the progressive mindset. You're just angry that the results of progressivism ended up being what they are today. Question 5, am I an all or nothing type? The black pill is reserved for those people who expected the world and it got only a neighborhood. They expected Donald Trump to give us an ethno-state when instead he just bought us some time. They wanted the Turner Diaries, just as Pierce, who was probably an intelligence or law enforcement asset, would have it, but got Charlottesville instead. There has been an idolatry of power which supposes that if only we could get total control over the American Leviathan, we could make all our dreams come true. If only we could win complete control over the system, then we would have everything that we wanted. This is nationalism for losers precisely because it loses every single time it tries to do this. Final question, do I strive for neurotic purity? Purity spiraling is for losers and DNC shills. Have a broad circle across the right. Heck, you ought to be friends with the Hoteps too. Neo-reactionaries might be goofballs at times, but they're good at thinking things over. If anyone on a general side of things, even the libertarians, get some sort of victory, it's best to find some good in how that affects your side. This is not just don't let the perfect be enemy of the good. This is don't be a brat. Here's a handy test for getting along with someone politically. Simply ask yourself if you and him share at least half of the broader priorities in your ideology. Closed borders, non-masochistic education, silencing the pervert industrial complex. Ask yourself what your limits are. If you find that you can only hang out with people who agree with you 100% on everything, you will find yourself a lonely failure. Conclusion, ask yourself these questions and I guarantee this will provide some clarity on your direction. A lot of these problems have more or less been dealt with by the movement at large, but they're also some of the biggest contributors to our failures, and naming them will help our guys prevent further losses. In doing this, we ensure victories in the future. Let's talk about the great show trial going on in Minneapolis. And I'm just going to do a quick, I should have done this before the show, but I want to find out the demographics of Minneapolis. because this is relevant to the nature of the jury there. Okay, according to Wikipedia, this is based on census estimates. In 2019, whites were 63.8% of people in Minneapolis, non-Hispanic, 59.8%. That is a solid plurality. Black or African American, 19.4%. Hispanic or Latino of any kind, 9.6%. Asian, 6.1%. Two or more races, 4.6%. This is from Pam Key at Breitbart. CNN political commentator Van Jones said Monday on CNN's Cuomo Primetime that if former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin were not found guilty of killing George Floyd, America would be in a, quote, dangerous position as a country, unquote. Jones says, everybody I'm talking to are frustrated, re-triggered, re-traumatized. Seeing that video, seeing the complete contempt for life, you have a generation of African Americans and their allies. I'm talking this entire young generation that is watching this to see if America, listen, the system is on trial here. The system is on trial. And I can't tell you, people have tried to push away from this, move on from this. Ho, ho, very satirical, Van. Today brought it all back home for tens of millions of people. And if this is considered legal conduct from a police officer, if you can do this in broad daylight and not go to jail, it will be perceived as open season, telling police officers from coast to coast, you can literally get away with murder in broad daylight. So this, I think today was a brutal day for the people who were able to watch. A lot of people weren't even able to watch. They said, I just can't even put myself through it again. Oh, lots of black people out there who haven't seen the video of George Floyd. What are you talking about? Like 17 people? You're putting us in a very dangerous situation, Van Jones said. What you do that, because what you're now saying is that it doesn't matter if you follow the rules. We are not going to back off. Okay. Yeah. Essentially, what Van Jones is saying is that Chauvin had better be convicted, or Minneapolis and, well, all of America is going to go up in flames. I can't see this as anything other than a threat. Again, from Breitbart, Jeff Poor. On Monday, Fox News Channel's Tucker Carlson offered his theory as to why CNN and other media outlets covered all the tedious details of the Derek Chauvin trial. He said, I hope you spent a restful weekend with the ones you love, away from the insanity. And if you did, you were reminded that this is still the best country in the world for a very simple reason. It has the best people, the happiest people. Most people are happy. Worth being reminded that. There's a lot of drama going on, though, of course. And as if we needed more, the George Floyd trial has finally started in Minneapolis, and the other channels are covering it like a championship game, which makes sense if your job is to make Americans hate each other. If your job is to divide the country, and that's how they see their job, the opportunity to talk about George Floyd all day is like your Super Bowl. So this morning, CNN spent hours airing footage of prosecutors questioning one of the emergency dispatchers who happened to be on duty the day that George Floyd died. It wasn't very interesting. It had no inherent news value. Is that your voice on the 911 recording? The prosecutor asked at one point. Yes, the dispatcher replied. And so it went interminably on. The trial may be boring, but it's important. It's not about George Floyd. Obviously, it never was. No one on CNN cared about George Floyd while he was alive. He was unemployed and on drugs like a lot of people in this country. They paid him no attention. And no one on CNN actually cares about George Floyd now. What they care about is you and your role in the systemic racism that supposedly killed George Floyd. If the Floyd trial ends in acquittal, there could be riots. We accept that as a fact of life in this country. No civilized country should accept that, but suddenly we do. And if there are riots, innocent people may die, as they did in large numbers this summer. CNN will downplay those deaths or justify them, as they did this summer, as they have so many times before, when those deaths are politically convenient. The point isn't to save people from dying. The point is to punish you and to change America. So from that perspective, it's worth it. And that's why they are replaying that video of George Floyd dying on the sidewalk to remind you of all of that, of your culpability in his death. And that's why even as they rub the country's face in the death of George Floyd, There were other tragic deaths, some on video they ignore completely. Here's one. A 66-year-old Pakistani immigrant named Muhammad Anwar died in Washington recently. As in George Floyd's case, his death was on video. Unlike George Floyd, Muhammad Anwar was not a violent career criminal with a drug habit. He worked at the very bottom of the so-called gig economy. Anwar made his living driving for Uber Eats. It's a tough gig. On Tuesday, he was driving near Nationals Park in Southeast Washington when two girls assaulted him with a taser gun. The girls were 13 and 15 years old. Anwar resisted. It was his car. It was the key to his living. He didn't want to lose it. A bystander recorded what happened next, and it's awful. His last words, "This is my car." And it was. Bystanders watched all of this happening. You saw them in the video. They videotaped it, but no one stepped forward to help Muhammad Anwar. The two girls hit the gas. They flipped the car over. Anwar flew out of the vehicle, landed face down in the sidewalk, dead, crushed. But the girls who killed him didn't seem bothered by this. "My phone is in there. My phone," one of them screamed. She cared more about her phone than the life of the man she just killed. Well, this raises all kinds of questions, not just about them, but about us. What kind of society produced children like this? Who raised them? And again, what does this say about our country that no one jumped in to help this poor man before he was killed? Those are real questions, but CNN wasn't interested in asking any of them. Well, I'm going to get back to that question of one's responsibility to intervene in cases such as this. Why don't I just talk about it right now? There's a horrific video of an Asian woman, an elderly Asian woman, supposedly walking to church on Monday, who was savaged by a black man. And the doorman in the building, just inside, no, he didn't take any action. Well, what if there had been people in Washington, D.C. who decided to help this Muhammad Anwar? So you have two enraged black girls, 13 and 15. And what if physical restraint, what if physical violence was required to stop these girls from the carjacking, which led to Anwar's death? Do you think that there are many white Americans who want to put themselves in a situation where they can be shown to have delivered violence against black people, particularly black girls? No, I do not think so. Because what we would typically see in a case like this is there would be an edited video showing some white man or white men just wailing on a couple of black girls, and their lives would be over. And, a story from the New York Times. And the New York Times they're barely hiding their glee at this. This is from Shayla Dewan and Tim Arango, who are the jurors in the Derek Chauvin trial. Oh, but we're not supposed to know this for obvious reasons, right? The jurors bring to the table a range of views about race and policing, some forged by lifelong experience and some formed after the death of George Floyd. A white intensive care nurse who said if she saw someone on the street who needed help, she would feel obligated to step in. Yeah, easier said than done. A black grandmother who said she had no personal experience with the police or the criminal justice system. Unlikely, probably not her, but her sons, if she had them, or grandchildren. A white widow who rides a motorcycle in her spare time and said she believes that all lives matter. Oh, dear. A black man who works in banking and said he was eager to serve on the jury of the most historic case of my lifetime. The jury is a demographic mix: 3 black men, 1 black woman, and 2 women who identified themselves as multiracial. There are 2 white men and 4 white women. They are urban and suburban, ranging in ages from their 20s to their 60s. The 2 alternates are white women. The jurors bring to the table a range of views about Chauvin, Floyd, race, and policing, some forged by long life experience and some formed after the video of Floyd dying under Chauvin's knee launched a new civil rights movement. Oh, is that what it is? I thought it was a shakedown movement and a terror movement. And yet they remain invisible, unseen by all but the very few people allowed in the courtroom. You see, the New York Times does not believe that these jurors should be invisible. They should be known, their faces, and their names, and quite possibly their addresses and phone numbers, so that they can be held, responsible directly if things go badly in this trial. That is to say, if Chauvin is not convicted of both charges. It's as if the New York Times really gets the impression that the New York Times is looking for a race war in America. I don't know why they would come to the conclusion that would be a good thing for the people who work at the New York Times. John Nolte writes at Breitbart, if you live in a city run by Democrats, you need to prepare yourself for the possible aftermath of a Derek Chauvin verdict. If Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer on trial for the death of George Floyd, P.S. Minneapolis has been run exclusively by Democrats for decades, is found not guilty, America's left-wing terrorists and Antifa and Black Lives Matter will almost certainly make last year's riots look like a dress rehearsal. Last summer, after that awful video of Floyd's death hit the internet, where did the worst of the violence hit? In these Democrat-run cities, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Fayetteville, Atlanta, New York, Nashville, Seattle, Portland, Philadelphia, Chicago, Milwaukee, Salt Lake, Washington, D.C., Detroit, Indianapolis, San Francisco, Kansas City, Houston, Charlotte, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Denver, Dallas, Phoenix, Tampa, Baltimore, Oakland, Louisville, and even a little place called Kenosha. Does anyone doubt that terrorists and Black Lives Matter and Antifa are planning and plotting for a second wave of violence should Chauvin be acquitted? Furthermore, does anyone doubt that the Biden Justice Department will be okay with this violence, will stand by and do nothing? Keep in mind, his fraudulency, Joe Biden, believes America has this violence coming, even though it only happens in cities that overwhelmingly support him. What's more, does anyone believe in the event of an acquittal, the corrupt corporate media, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, will not openly encourage and champion this violence, just like they did in Ferguson, Baltimore, and all the cities listed above? Listen, Nolte counsels, if you own a business in a Democrat-run city, especially some sort of storefront, you need to prepare. Fire insurance, riot insurance, window coverings, I don't know. I'm not going to give specific advice, but you do need to prepare. If you reside in a Democrat-run city, especially downtown or close to downtown, you also need to prepare. Don't forget that these left-wing terrorists have already begun to move into residential areas. There's another possibility here, which is that Chauvin is convicted and people riot anyway. We have a precedent in this for National Basketball Association championship celebrations. For decades, they have been called happy riots. And particularly in Los Angeles, they often cause a great deal of damage. And, before I move on to the New York Times, let's go to the chat. The Gangster of Love. What? A Steve Miller reference. Asian dude got pummeled on the subway in New York City. This is becoming more and more popular, of people getting pummeled on the subway or pushed in front of subway cars. Gamian says, how ironic that Trump's shithole country became the U.S. Gerard Depardieu says, terrified at how effectively the media suppressed the story of the mentally ill man being burned alive, could barely find it on Google. Wasn't that originally on World Star? That one? Okay. Gamian says, I love how they want us to step in after they unleashed. Yeah, okay. And defunded the police. Oh, yes. How come the good men didn't step up? Yeah, let's you and him fight, all of these women are saying on Twitter. Wait a minute. I thought there were no good men, that it was all toxic masculinity. Why don't you step in? I mean, if women are just as capable, just as strong as men are, then why don't they step in? They need men to defend them? That sounds very problematic to me. Eager to serve on the jury, how did they let him on, says Anran. That's exactly what I was thinking. Adam says, Google identifies George Floyd as American hip-hop artist. So bizarre. What else could they call him? I can think of a few things. Guilty, what does this say, 718? 718, keep up the good fight, Kevin. Traditional values need defending, even if it takes an effeminate hotel-dwelling agoraphobe to do it. Oh, my. Such bitterness, such hatred. Agoraphobe? I'm not an agoraphobe. I'm out on the streets all the time. Matthew Gubbins says Chauvin is going to walk. And I didn't pick the bedspreads here. You know, they come with the room. Not what I would have chosen. Chauvin should sue Floyd's family for that $27 million, says Gamian. Oh, yeah, I would not want to be in that jury. And, you know, someone who's eager to serve on that jury, I just have to assume that he is eager to convict Chauvin. Okay, what else do we have here? Now let's talk about the New York Times here. The New York Times is they're so concerned about the Republican Party. What happened to the Republican Party that we knew and loved? I've been hearing this my whole life, and it's complete rubbish. The Republicans are Neanderthals, and they've always been Neanderthals, according to the people who write for the New York Times. This is from Paul Krugman, and it's called "Why Can't Republicans Beat Populists? The Establishment Has Been Routed, but Its Economic Orthodoxy Rules." Like many observers, Krugman writes, "I used to have a what's the matter with Kansas model of the GOP that is like Thomas Frank, the author of the 2004 book with that title. I saw the Republican Party essentially as an enterprise run by and for plutocrats that managed to win elections by playing to the cultural grievances and racial hostility of working class whites." Oh, you can't possibly be that stupid. Even Paul Krugman can't possibly be that stupid. As if the Republican Party has had before Trump had any interest in working class whites. Too funny. Bigotry, however, was mainly a show put on for the rubes. The party would go back to its pro-rich priorities as soon as each election was over. The classic example came when George W. Bush won re-election by posing as America's defender against gay married terrorists. What? Then followed his victory by announcing that he had a mandate to privatize Social Security. He didn't. Mandates. You want to talk about mandates, Paul Krugman? That leaders constantly claim that they have a mandate to do in this, when indeed they have no such thing. Often they claim to have a mandate that they barely mentioned during the campaign. But no, what they're saying is that they have the power. Billionaires may have started the Republican Party on its march toward extremism. Yeah, billionaires and supporters of the Koch brothers were obviously the people who started the Republican Party on its so-called march toward extremism. But they've clearly lost control of the forces they conjured up. The GOP can no longer put intolerance back in the closet. Don't you mean the bottle instead of the closet? After each election, so as to focus on the real business of tax cuts and deregulation, instead the extremists are in charge, despite a lost election and a violent insurrection. Yeah, that's what it was, an insurrection. What's left of the old Republican establishment has abased itself on the altar of Trumpism, This is a religious issue. Is it? Speaking of religious issues, the religious right of, all people to vote, whether they're eligible to vote or not. There's typically hysterical piece from Jamel Bowie. The GOP has some voters it likes and some it doesn't. This is what happens when a political party turns against democracy. The most outrageous provision of the Election Integrity Act of 2021, the omnibus election bill, signed by Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia last week, is one that makes it illegal for anyone except poll workers to offer food or water directly to voters standing in line. Defenders of the law say that it's meant to stop electioneering at the polls, Critics say that it is a direct response to volunteers who assisted those Georgians, many of them black, who waited for hours to cast their ballots in the 2020 presidential election. Oh, really? They had an awful lot of mail-in ballots there in Georgia. Were there people dropping to the pavement, suffering from dehydration and starvation, waiting in line to vote? Do you really expect us to believe that? As I mentioned the other day, Americans, and Canadians for that matter, don't seem to go anywhere without a carton, frequently a large carton of some sort of potable liquid, or thermoses full of coffee or whatever, or various containers, often very large, filled with water and all manner of things. No, but dehydration, a very serious problem in people waiting, half an hour, maybe 2 hours, really, to vote? Yes. No. Obviously, you don't want free for all with people waiting in line to vote. It's electioneering is a legitimate concern. Let's see. The Republican Party, according to Bowie, is driving the nation's democratic decline. A recent paper by Jacob M. Grumbach, a political scientist at the University of Washington, makes this plain. Using a new measure of state-level democratic performance in the United States from 2018, Grumbach finds that Republican control of state government, quote, consistently and profoundly reduces state democratic performance during this time period, unquote. That means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Apparently, Grumbach had a laundry list of things he wanted state governments to do. So Republican state governments aren't doing what Jacob M. Grumbach, the esteemed political scientist at the University of Washington, wants that to do. So this is a profound reduction in state demographic performance. Where does all this lead? Louis laments. Perhaps it just ends with a few new restrictions and new limits, enough in conjunction with redistricting to tilt the field in favor of the Republican Party in the next election cycle, but not enough to substantially undermine American democracy. Looking at the 2020 election, however, and in particular the 147 congressional Republicans who voted not to certify the Electoral College vote, it's not hard to imagine how this escalates, especially if Trump and his allies are still in control of the party. If Republicans are building the infrastructure to subvert an election, to make it possible to overturn results or keep Democrats from claiming electoral votes, then we have to expect that given a chance, they'll use it. So he starts off with Georgia, and Georgia was the state where in 2018, a woman called Stacey Abrams ran against a man called Brian Kemp. And Brian Kemp won the election, but for months afterwards, Stacey Abrams insisted that Brian Kemp had not, in fact, won the election, certainly not legitimately, and she was the real governor of Georgia. And somehow she didn't become deplatformed, unpersoned, and somehow all of those people on social media and elsewhere who backed her claims were not removed from social media. And by the way, I thought that it was impossible to steal an election in the United States of America. I suppose it depends on cases, though, doesn't it? All about the specific cases. Horses for courses. Now, I was speaking about the very idea of racism yesterday, and I think you know my opinion on this. But just to give you a little more evidence, this is from Lauren Lewis at the Daily Mail. White people must keep quiet when racism is discussed. Call by Paris's deputy mayor prompts new fury over American woke culture taking over France. Left-wing deputy mayor Audrey Pulvar, 49, said white people should be asked to keep quiet and be silent spectators during discussions around racism attended by Black and ethnic minority people. She explained, quote, people who suffer discrimination for the same reasons and in the same way feel the need to meet among themselves to discuss it, unquote. The comments by Polvar, who was born in Martinique, have re-sparked concerns over the rise of American woke culture in the French state. A collection of politicians, prominent intellectuals, and academics argued last month that France was being contaminated by American ideas on race, gender, and post-colonialism, and that they were undermining French society. The group have seen Polvar's comment as proof French society is being eroded by American ideals, the Times reports. Former Socialist Prime Minister Manuel Valls said Polvar's comments betrayed French values in an interview on Europe 1 radio. He said, "This rhetoric, always justifying the victim, leads to disaster. Do you have to be Jewish to talk about anti-Semitism?" The row, which has highlighted divisions in French politics, was prolonged when President Emmanuel Macron waded into the debate in a speech on the fight against separatism in October. He warned against leaving the intellectual debate to others as he cautioned over the rise of social science theories imported from the United States. You know, they don't keep racial statistics in France because of the belief that everyone in France is the same. So, you know, when all the cars in cities, or, you know, hundreds of them, are burned and you have all manner of unpleasantness, then the French can say, well, no, we can't point any fingers here because if some Frenchman did some bad things to other Frenchmen. But my point about racism is simply this: don't use the word, don't concede the argument, because racism belongs to non-white people. It's baked in the cake. All this carrying on about, no, I'm not a racist. You are saying to your enemies that you get to define my good intentions, my bona fides. And that is just a losing strategy. Let's talk about diversity in the United States military. I saw a picture of this fellow who has now become briefly controversial, and I thought, I just thought it was made up, because this person, he looks like he was created in a laboratory. His name is Richard Torres Estrada. This is from taskandpurpose.com. U.S. Special Operations Command has hired someone to be in charge of diversity, leading many critics to voice their outrage on social media about the military becoming unbearably woke since former President Donald Trump left office just over 2 months ago. On March 25th, SOCOM announced on its Facebook page that Richard Torres Estrada would serve as the command's first ever Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer to help recruit America's finest into the special operations community. I've been given no indication that Richard Torres Estrada is actually a member of the military. You know, even in the Red Army, their commissars were military members. The announcement drew instant pushback from people on Facebook and other social media platforms who felt that SOCOM was lowering its standards to allow unqualified candidates to join the most elite fighting forces in the world, all in the name of diversity. Many of the comments in response to the Facebook post centered around the inherent exclusivity of the special operations community, with some people voicing concern that SOCOM's high standards might be lowered for the sake of diversity and inclusion, while others argued that a more diverse force is a stronger one. Yes, according to Special Operations Command, Torres Estrada has nearly 2 decades worth of experience working diversity and inclusion programs and activities in federal agencies. Wow, nice work if you can get it. UFC fighter and former Army Special Forces soldier Tim Kennedy posted on Instagram that the military's sole focus must be to win wars, and anything that distracts from that will cost the lives of American service members. So what do we know about this fellow? Does he have any political views that might be interesting? Apparently he does. He tweeted on June the 2nd, 2020, "Here I leave this and slowly retire to continue working from home." And on the right is a picture of Donald Trump holding a Bible outside St. John's Parish Church in Washington. And on the left is Adolf Hitler holding a Bible in front of a large group of Nazi supporters. Well, the picture is actually doctored. Hitler wasn't exactly fond of the Bible, because it was written by Jews. Yes, on Monday morning, the post was marked partly false information by Facebook, since the photo of Hitler he posted was doctored. Torres Estrada had also posted on July the 8th, 2020, another Trump meme with alleged quotes from his former advisors criticizing him. He added the caption, "I just have to post this. If you still don't understand how racism works, apparently she broke into their house." Yes, and it's Karen, played by Goldilocks, who's having the bears arrested, and one of them appears to, is being brutalized by a policeman. Yeah, as I say, nice work, if you can get it. So let's return to our discussion of James Burnham's The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom. And we are near the end, and Burnham is summing up, discussing the nature of democracy. Now, within any field of human interest, liberty is a necessary condition of scientific advance. This follows because science can proceed only where there is complete freedom to advance hypotheses contrary to prevailing opinion. Pareto, indeed, considers liberty to be an indispensable requirement of scientific method. It follows that before a theory can be considered true, it is virtually indispensable that there be perfect freedom to impugn it. Any limitation, even indirect and however remote, imposed on anyone choosing to contradict it is enough to cast suspicion upon it. Hence, freedom to express one's thoughts, even counter to the opinion of the majority or of all, even when it offends the sentiments of a few or of the many, even when it is generally reputed absurd or criminal, always proves favorable to the discovery of objective truth. Now, we can see that if Pareto is right, then we do not have scientific freedom. Because those people who have, let's say, stood outside the majority consensus on lockdowns, masks, distancing, vaccines, the elite has declared war on them. Burnham continues, it must be added that it is possible for liberty to remain within restricted scientific fields, the physical sciences, for example, even when it has disappeared in political and social affairs generally. Nevertheless, under such conditions, its continuance in the restricted fields would seem to be precarious, as it's indicated by the political intervention of modern totalitarian governments, especially Russia and Germany, to suppress or lessen liberty in fields like biology and even physics. Well, now we're seeing this in math. Does 2 + 2 = 4? White people, white supremacists would have you believe that. It's a serious argument that's being made now. Also, the use of musical notation, symbolic language. No, apparently this is offensive, and it triggers Black people and other minorities. So no less than Oxford University is talking about removing it from instruction. Burnham continues, experience seemed to show that almost always liberty is a condition for an advanced level of civilization, in the sense that Mosca uses this expression. That is, liberty is needed to permit the fullest release of the potential social forces and creative impulses present in society and their maximum development. With liberty absent, great development may occur along certain restricted lines, in religion perhaps, or the technique of war, or a conventionalized art style, but the compulsory conformity to official opinion limits variety and stultifies creative freshness, not only in the arts and sciences, but in economic and political affairs as well. Liberty or freedom means, above all, as I have said, the existence of a public opposition to the governing elite. The crucial difference that freedom makes to a society is found in the fact that the existence of a public opposition or oppositions is the only effective check on the power of the governing elite. I mean, you've seen this. You've seen it in Britain, you've seen it in Canada, you've seen it all over. Know that the opposition is not going to oppose, because if it were to oppose certain measures relating to COVID-19, then it would be in favor of murder. This is to what we have been reduced. The Machiavellians are the only ones who have told us the full truth about power. Other writers have at most told the truth only about groups other than the ones for which they themselves speak. The Machiavellians present the complete record. The primary object in practice of all rulers is to serve their own interest, to maintain their own power and privilege. There are no exceptions. No theory, no promises, no morality, no amount of goodwill, no religion will restrain power. Neither priests nor soldiers, neither labor leaders nor businessmen, neither bureaucrats nor feudal lords will differ from each other in the basic use with which they seek to make of power. Individual saints, except in individual intention from the law of power, will nevertheless be always bound to it through the disciples, associates, and followers to whom they cannot, in organized social life, avoid being tied. Only power restrains power. That restraining power is expressed in the existence and activity of oppositions. Oddly and fortunately, it is observable that the remaining influence of an opposition much exceeds its apparent strength. As anyone with experience in any organization knows, even a small opposition, provided it really exists and is active, can block to a remarkable degree the excesses of the leadership. But when all opposition is destroyed, there is no longer any limit to what power may do. A despotism, any kind of despotism, can be benevolent only by accident. And again, you've seen this throughout the West after the Second World War. All must be on one side. Well, what if you're not on one side? Well, that makes you wicked. And you remember the unpleasantness of 1939 to 1945? You don't want to go through that again, do you? You don't want to be responsible for that, do you? So, on immigration, multiculturalism, diversity, climate change, practically any issue you could mention, the so-called right-wing parties, they'll provide any opposition at all because they're afraid of being demonized as immoral. And now, well, extremists and white supremacists. Burnham continues, it may, however, be argued, as it is by anarchists and the sectarian wing of Marxism, that the influence of the opposition in restraining the power of the rulers is, after all, of small importance to the non-elite, to the masses. When an opposition exists, this means only that there is a division in the ruling class. If an out-elite replaces the governing elite, this is only a change in the personnel of the rulers. The masses remain still the ruled. Why should they be concerned? And of what interest is the whole process for the great majority? It is true that the opposition is only a section of the elite as a whole. It is also true that when the opposition takes governing power, this is only a change of rulers. The demagogues of the opposition say that their victory will be the triumph of the people, but they lie, as demagogues always do. Nevertheless, the seeming conclusion does not follow. It is not true that the activities of the oppositions are a matter of indifference for the masses. Through a curious and indirect route by way of freedom, we return to self-government, which we were unable to discover by any direct path. The existence of an opposition means a cleavage in the ruling class. Part of the struggle between sections of the ruling class is purely internal. Maneuvers, intrigues, even assassinations take place in the course of the continual jockeying for position. When, however, the opposition is public, this means that the conflicts cannot be solved merely by internal changes in the existing elite. This is crucial. The opposition must be public. Now, we're all familiar, perhaps we've even talked to politicians who have said, of course I'm against this stupid thing. Well, why don't you speak out against it publicly? Oh, well, that would be more than my job's worth. Well, you're not up to your job then. I've mentioned with regard to immigration, climate change, multiculturalism, that the reason that polls will show support for current positions being taken by governments is that there is no one on the other side. Even though that there are a great number of people in the masses who are opposed to this, they are leaderless. They're leaderless because those people who should be in the opposition are cowards, and they are thus not fit for purpose. Burnham continues, the opposition is forced to undertake external moves beyond the limits of the ruling class. Since rule depends upon the ability to control existing social forces, the opposition seeks to draw forces to its side and to win over new leaders who are coming up from the ranks of society. In this attempt, it must promise certain benefits to certain groups. If successful, it must keep at least a few of its promises. At the same time, the struggle stimulates new demands by many groups, even by the non-elite. Finally, the opposition must seek to destroy the prestige of the governing elite by exposing the inequities of its rule, which it knows much better than do the masses. Confronted with this multiple attack, the governing elite, in order to keep control, is in turn compelled to grant certain concessions and to correct at least some of the more glaring abuses. The net indirect result of the struggle, which from one point of view is only a fight between two sets of leaders, can thus be benefits for large sections of the masses. The masses, blocked by the iron law of oligarchy from directly and deliberately ruling themselves, are able to limit and control indirectly the power of the rulers. The myth of self-government is translated into a measure of reality by the fact of freedom. You saw under Donald Trump, because of his restriction of immigration, both legal and illegal, wages were rising for American workers, and American workers, working class people. Now, the Republican establishment and the Democrats do not like this. They prefer people to be on, well, Democrats would prefer them to be on welfare. Thus, they are owned by the state. The GOP establishment loves illegals because they work for less. They mean more profits for the plutocrats. Now, it would be possible, and is still possible, for the Democratic Party to make a concession to the working class, saying we're not going to have open borders. We understand that the greater the number of workers vying for jobs means that wages have to fall. So we're going to come down on the side of the people that are already here. But no, they're not willing to do that because they have everything in their pockets. You know, they have the courts in their pocket, they have the media in their pockets, they have academia in their pockets, they have big business in their pockets. So no, we don't have to give this small concession to the masses, to the working class. Now, this is a dangerous decision on their part. Burnham continues, these then are the primary effects of political liberty of freedom upon the social structure. However, the question of liberty does not end, as the Machiavellians again relentlessly show, at the bare political level. They explain not merely what liberty is, what it means for society, but also what the conditions are for its preservation. The right of public opposition to the rulers, the heart of freedom, will not be kept alive merely by wishing. And it is besides very doubtful that a majority of men are much concerned about it one way or the other. It requires the existence in society of a number of relatively autonomous social forces, as Mosca calls them. It demands that no single social force, the army or liquid wealth or the church or industrial management or agriculture or labor or the state machine, whatever it might be, shall be strong enough to swallow up the rest and thereby be in a position to dominate all phases of social life. When this happens, there cannot be a significant opposition to the rulers because the opposition cannot have any social weight and therefore cannot restrain the power of the rulers. It is only when there are several different major social forces, not wholly subordinated to any one social force, that there can be any assurance of liberty, since only then is there the mutual check and balance that is able to chain power. There is no one force, no one group, and no one class that is the preserver of liberty. Liberty is preserved by those who are against the existing chief power. Oppositions which do not express genuine social forces are as trivial in relation to entrenched power as the old court jesters. Well, you see that very clearly in the so-called Conservative Party of Canada with its exciting new leader, Erin O'Toole. Yes, I am dedicated to restraining the extreme members of my party. What does that mean? What it means is you're going to get 90% of what the Liberal Party is proposing, or maybe 95%. Oh no, but we're more responsible than them. Yes, we want Canada overrun by hostile foreigners, but it has to be done legally and responsibly. It's trivial. You see Burnham talking about social forces, the importance of social forces, and I find it amusing that we have this phenomenon of social media over the last, 15 years, which has become so powerful. And it's been decided in recent years that no, we're going to purge all of the people. We're going to purge all of the people who hold oppositional views because we cannot allow them. We cannot allow this to become a genuine social force. Burnham continues, from this point of view, we may understand more fully the political direction of our democratic totalitarians. The state, they say, when it is led by their leader, and it always will be because they take as their leader the one who happens to be in the saddle, is the people. Democracy is the supremacy of the people. Therefore, democracy is the supremacy of the state. Whenever the state absorbs another phase of social life, that is a victory for democracy. And therefore, more particularly, a serious critic of the state or its policies is an extremist and maybe a traitor. You see how prescient Burnham is? Pressure groups, as they call them, that is, the groups whose activities simply represent the interplay of autonomous social forces, which is the only foundation for liberty, are saboteurs of democracy. The church is fascist if it wants to have its own schools, independent of the state-controlled educational system. John L. Lewis is a Nazi if he refuses to allow his section of the labor movement to be integrated into the state labor machinery. Industrial management is playing the game of the enemy if it points out that even state bureaus are wrong when they declare that more steel can be made by following abstract political aims than by accepting the consequences of modern technology. Teachers are spies if they wish to control on the claim that of expert knowledge and proficiency the presentation of their subjects. Farmers are slackers if they argue they cannot raise more dairy products with no hands to milk their cows. Skeptics are notorious reactionaries if they doubt, however mildly, that state control will of itself draw all the viciousness from private monopolies or free the press and radio from all distortion of the news. Yes, state control, private monopolies. We have an interesting situation now where the elites in the Western countries seem to be quite pleased overall with the quasi-monopolies of social media and their control over the dissemination of news and discourse, because these companies, they believe in the same things as our elite. And once again, they are willing to move swiftly and powerfully to dispossess those people who would actually form an opposition. The policies of the democratic totalitarians are consistent with each other and consistent with what they mean by democracy. And they are consistent also in being uniformly directed against the foundations of freedom, not unity, but difference, not the modern state, but whatever it is able to maintain itself against the state, not leaders, but the unyielding opponents of leaders, not conformity with official opinion, but persisting criticism are the defenses of freedom. A considerable degree of liberty is not usual in human society. If we review the history of humanity as far as we know it, it is apparent that despotic regimes are far more frequent than free regimes, and it would therefore seem that despotism is more nearly than freedom in accord with human nature. Moreover, special circumstances of our time count heavily against freedom. Pareto shows how the maximum external strength of a community in a struggle against other communities for survival need not at all coincide with the maximum of internal welfare for the members of the community. We certainly saw that in Stalin's Soviet Union. We are now at a period when the external struggle for survival is at the most acute possible juncture. Keep in mind, this book came out in 1943. Many sincere men feel that liberty, even though it may contribute most to internal welfare, cannot stand up against despotism. In the external struggle, liberty, they argue, means too much dissipation of energy, too much delay, too much division. These feelings make it easier for them to accept the loss of liberty as an individual destiny. And I will return to Burnham tomorrow. Leak the info, says Hikmah Warrior. Are we talking about the names of the jurors? I have no doubt that that is being done, even as we speak. And what else do we have here? I miss the pre-Vatican II masses. They were almost always majestic, says Hikmah Warrior. Well, Bishop Fulton Sheen famously said that the Tridentine Mass is the sweetest thing this side of heaven. But I guess it was simply too beautiful that the leaders of the Catholic Church decided that we deserve ugliness instead. Adolf Himmler says, the sounds of diversity coming through KMG's hotel window. Actually, it's coming through a wall. Let's see. Goose says, I was given a vintage copy of Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose for my birthday. Boys will no longer be shamed by the sapphic acolytes of Big Sister Cybele, says Hikmah Warrior. Okay, what else do we have here? Didn't Russia restrict ban U.S. evangelical adoption agencies a few years ago? I think they did. There's a reaction in Russia and Eastern European countries about them being seen as baby farms for rich Westerners. Goose says, pagan Rome declined and the church picked up the pieces going to establish Christendom. The same will happen in America. This is a pagan nation. It will get worse before it gets better. Okay, moving on. Oh, yes, feelings. Nothing more than feelings. And let's get back to what women are like. Someone called Marissa Meltzer had a very long piece, in the Washington Post yesterday. How New Age spirituality and sensitive masculinity led to QAnon. I didn't choose New Age culture, she begins. But I grew up in a college town in Northern California in the 1980s where the ubiquitous Grateful Dead stickers, crystal shops, and tarot card readers suggested that the 1960 ethos of self-discovery never ended. Psychedelic accoutrements and people who self-identified as seekers were normal to me. And so I craved mainstream American culture. I rebelled mildly by eating Domino's pizza at sleepovers. More on that later. And idolizing the nihilism of 1970s punk. It turns out that I didn't entirely resist it. In the past decade or so, my fluency in the world of New Age culture, wellness, woo-woo, whatever you might call it, became a professional boon as a journalist. These ideas were taking off once again, especially among women who are white and middle class, which I also am. I understood that world and had a lot to say about it. While on assignment, I've gone to menstrual huts and tea ceremonies. I've gotten massaged by boa constrictors, and I've meditated at sound baths. I've greeted all this with professional curiosity, something between an open mind and world-weary arched eyebrow. Journalism is increasingly becoming simply the ramblings of people about their own lives. That, okay, so you grew up in Northern California and it's full of idiots and this affected you. All right, you've been to menstrual huts. What have you learned from this? On January 6th, along with the rest of the country, I followed the news of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Oh, and the prominence of Confederate flags, nooses, and other symbols of the far right. Yeah, okay, apparently you didn't learn very much. Like many others, I took note of the so-called QAnon shaman, 33-year-old Jake Angeli, born Jacob Anthony Chansley of Arizona. He was bare-chested and covered in Nordic tattoos, at least one of which, the Valknot, is a Norse symbol sometimes associated with white supremacy. Is there any symbol, even this symbol, has been associated with white supremacy? How long before the thumbs up are associated? I mean, there's ableism there, right? Because I have two thumbs, and there are people out there who are missing one, or sometimes even two. But this shaman was also infamously wearing a headdress fashioned from buffalo horns and coyote skin, elements associated with the American West that seem to telegraph a pagan spirituality. I've been around a lot of white people who have adopted a mishmash of pagan and indigenous signifiers as a New Age aesthetic. It's a cringeworthy and offensive display of appropriation that I don't endorse, but it's common in that world. How is it offensive, actually? I'm curious about that. People who adopt indigenous or Native American or Native Indian symbols are generally by nature not against those people. They are rather in favor of them as opposed to against them. After the attack on the Capitol, news reports unearthed that Chansley was a founder of something called the Star Seed Academy. In a certain New Age vernacular, a star seed is a higher being. The Facebook page for the venture, before it was taken down, read, Star Seed Academy creates leaders of the highest order. We help people to awaken, evolve, and ascend. Are you ready to be a leader? Are you ready to ascend? Recently, Chansley's lawyer, Albert Watkins, told me in a statement that his client is deeply spiritual. His spirituality is serving him well as he traverses the pending federal charges. He added that Chansley has a personal commitment to ahimsa, the principle found in Jainism, Hinduism, and Buddhism of doing no harm. You know, she's trying to create a synthesis from this man, and I think it would simply be easier and more efficacious to go back to our old friend Shiva Naipaul's declaration of universal mental retardation. And she goes on and on and on and on about QAnon, as if QAnon is actually something that can be quantified. Oh, but it's been the emergence of conspirituality in the Journal of Contemporary Religion. And she and co-writer, that'd be Charlotte Ward, David Vos, a quantitative social scientist at University College London, noted an emphasis on patterns and connections in both conspiracy culture and alternative spiritual beliefs. These worldviews make public and personal life, respectively, seem less subject to random forces, and therein lies part of the appeal. I don't really see how the author of this piece is any different from that. Oh, but let's get some more autobiography. When I was about 10 years old, my mother became interested in the idea of the divine feminine, specifically centering spirituality on women rather than the patriarchal notion of a male god. She had never shown interest in spirituality before, but dived in with a religious fervor. She took me to a screening of the 1989 Canadian documentary, Goddess Remembered, about goddess worship in ancient European culture and its potential as a renewed spiritual movement. Bogus. Judging from the attendees of the goddess fairs and hotel ballrooms I was also taken to, this was a fairly white, progressive, and privileged group of women who served as a kind of spiritual extension of the women's liberation movement of the 1970s, parallel to feminism. No, it seemed more to the point. Shows the exhaustion of feminism. In the same way, if you look at so many, Jerry Rubin, a famous example, so many 60s revolutionaries, they became all new age in the 1970s. Tom Wolfe has written about this, that politics seemed to be a dead end. So now there was spiritualism, but more important, spiritualism that one could make a buck at. So apparently this QAnon is all very feminine somehow. Feminine spirituality. Nazi hippies, when the New Age and the far right overlap. Golly, I would have thought that the Nazis being followers of alternative spirituality and medicine, and many of them being outright pagans, I would have thought that'd be common knowledge, but apparently not. So I decided to do a little investigation into this woman, and I came across this, that she's written a book about being fat, okay? And she went on her first diet when she was 6 years old. Now, why I have to know this? 5 years old, according to the BBC. She wrote a book about the woman who founded Weight Watchers. And so she seems to be defining herself as a fat person. And again, it's all about the personal. All about the personal. Oh, here we go from The Guardian. Oh, no, here it says, I've been on a diet since I was 4. Pretty soon we're going to find out that this woman was on a diet in utero. As we sat on his couch drinking wine and talking about the use of psychedelic drugs in therapy, another modern intellectual. Me. Does the world exist outside of oneself? There's a word for this. It's called solipsism, which seems to become a genuine mass, or at least mass elite, social force, even a political movement. I touched on this yesterday, but this is such an amazing story that I'm going to come back to it again. Monica Showalter writes in The American Thinker, the Biden administration's CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, is quite a puddle of emotions. She first struck us as weird by putting out a public service ad urging the wearing of masks by smiling mirthlessly all the way through her spiel about the terrible things that would happen if she didn't, finishing with a flippant schoolgirl giggle. Now she's turning on the glurge. According to the New York Post, Walensky became emotional at a White House coronavirus press briefing Monday, her voice breaking as she warned that the U.S. is facing impending doom as COVID-19 cases rise again. I'm going to lose the script, and I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now, I'm scared. I know what it's like as a physician to stand in that patient room, gowned, gloved, masked, shielded, and to be the last person to touch someone else's loved one because their loved one couldn't be there. And I know what it's like to pull up to your hospital every day and see an extra morgue sitting outside. According to our author here, Monica Showalter, she sounds like someone who was trying to read with expression for her elementary school teacher in a class reading circle. What's more, her obsessive focus on herself as a wife, as a mother, as a daughter, along with her schoolgirlish I'm scared and worries of doom, don't exactly inspire confidence in her control of the matter. Heck, they don't even inspire confidence in her chops as a doctor. Most doctors are calm, authoritative, and knowledgeable and keep the attention on the patient, not on their feelings. She projects none of that. As for her personal experiences in medical wards, well, all I can say is that as emotional as those are, I doubt any can compare to that of my mother, who was in a hospital COVID ward for 2 weeks, watched as everyone in the room over the days died one by one, and emerged in the end as the sole survivor, hugged by her nurses against regulations for somehow surviving when no one else did. Don't tell us about COVID stories, Roch. Her drama queen performance actually provokes disbelief, given that she's not only a doctor, but a top doctor running the CDC, which is already a credibility challenge for its stance excusing Black Lives Matter rioters from wearing masks. This person, who can't even get attention off herself, is Biden's top doctor. Bet he wouldn't go to her if he had a real medical problem. Worse still, the actual content of her message is dreck. As Red State noted in a well-researched piece loaded with data, there's a lot of dishonesty in this clip to note. For one, the current spike is very small and could very well just be the result of reporting discrepancies. We're talking only about a 12% week-over-week rise. But it's the end. It's the very end. What's really gross about Walensky's comments is the claim that said spike is happening because states are reopening too quickly. That's a favorite left-wing talking point, but it holds no basis in reality. The only reason that claim is made is to attack states like Florida, Texas, Mississippi, and others that have removed restrictions. The lockdown states are having the spikes. The states that protected the vulnerable, unlike lockdown blue New York, for instance, and allowed normal activity for the healthy and the young, are doing fine. Bonchi at Red State notes that Walensky is a weak political creature ever eager to please her masters, and cites a number of U-turns and stupid statements she's made in this service. She's really a goofus, an embarrassment to the Biden administration, someone beneath her office, someone who has risen to her level of incompetence. Too bad she doesn't know it. And I watched the video, and now I'm going to complain of her doing something that I do, which the mobility of her facial expressions on this video, it really, it's remarkable because, I give people a lot of expressions, but I am essentially an entertainer. I am not the chief medical director of the United States of America. She does not seem to be a serious person, just like Kamala Harris. Oh, yes, she's a mother, she's a daughter, etc., etc. So what? So what? Was anyone making the claim that doctors don't have personal attachment, that doctors don't have feelings? Michael Crichton, in his book Electronic Life, he was a physician, and he explained about something that he'd learned a long time ago, that he was looking at outcomes in terms of doctors and how they related to patients. So there was this one doctor who had been a pro athlete, and another one who was more of a scholar. And the second doctor, that his technique was, impeccable and much better than the first ex-ball player doctor. But their bedside manner, that the better doctor, technical doctor, he would speak to his patients, and he would go into, all of the options, that could follow from the surgery. Whereas the cowboy doctor basically say, we're going to open you up, we're going to take the bad stuff out, we're going to stitch you up again, and you're going to be up and around in no time. And Crichton found that the data revealed that the cowboy doctor had much better outcomes because people respond to confidence. And what Walensky is giving Americans is blind, womanish panic. Which I don't think is called for at any time, but particularly not after a whole year of this nonsense. Vaccine passports. Yes. You ever get the feeling that a war is going on? It's supposed to be a war against COVID-19, but it's actually a war against ordinary people? This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. LA Times journalist Harry Littman says that vaccine passports are a good idea because they will help the Biden administration break the resistance down. Littman is a former U.S. attorney and deputy assistant attorney general, having been appointed by Bill Clinton, and now writes as a legal affair columnist. Here's the tweet in its entirety. Vaccine passports are a good idea. Among other things, it will single out the still large contingent of people who refuse vaccines, who will be foreclosed from doing a lot of things their peers can do. That should help break the resistance down. Yeah. So he's looking at the American people, much as a British general would have looked at the Boers in South Africa in 1900. Break the resistance down. And so what's next from Harry Littman? What is he going to advocate? Scorched earth? Concentration camps? It was the British who invented the concentration camp during the Boer War in order to break the spirit of these Dutchmen. Littman's remark was in reaction to reports that the Biden administration has been working with tech companies and nonprofits to create a vaccine passport that will play a role in multiple aspects of life. Watson continues, as we previously highlighted, the vaccine passport will likely be rolled into a digital ID card linked to facial recognition technology, greasing the skids for the introduction of an onerous communist Chinese-style social credit score system. With as many as 1 in 4 Americans likely to refuse to take the COVID-19 vaccine, the White House will seek to make ordinary life almost impossible for those who resist taking the shot, leaving millions of Americans under a de facto state of permanent lockdown. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has already unveiled the Excelsior Pass, which will mandate New Yorkers prove their vaccination status or a recent history of a negative COVID-19 test in order to gain entry to events and businesses. Littman's comment sounds like something an evil character in a dystopian thriller about a high-tech dictatorship would say, and that's precisely the point. I quoted from a story on Conservative Women last week, pointing out that the vaccine passport is absolutely useless because it is a snapshot of a moment in time. And it's good for how long? Because, things are constantly changing. People are exposed to all sorts of things. It is simply not true to say, oh, yes, I have a negative result here, or I've been vaccinated, and that means, oh, I'm not going to get COVID-19, or I'm not going to spread COVID-19. It doesn't mean any of those things. But apparently, we're all going to be forced to be vaccinated nonetheless. William Briggs. Boo-hoo-hoo. Yes, he thanks a reader for the clip. CDC director fights back tears. They didn't mention anything literal shaking in the article, but it must be there. If you're not literally shaking, you're not serious. Nice to see that the oligarchs picked a strong woman to lead us through this government-generated crisis. Too bad they didn't let her look at her own data before she broke down. Yes, he talks about the vaccine passport and comments, the love of money is the root of all evil. I believe it is IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, and Salesforce pushing this to guarantee profits in perpetuity. The oligarchs running Biden, who, yes, is still alive, have even admitted the push from the passport is coming from them. Nice to know you'll be tracked everywhere you go, though, isn't it? Saves memory by offloading it to corporations who love us. We've made Mark of the Beast jokes so often that the comedic effect is dulled. But if they get away with it for this one small disease, a vaccine for a not very dangerous bug, the passport will soon be expanded to other distinctions, including the aforesaid beastly mark. There hasn't been a slippery slope yet. Our rulers haven't jumped on with glee. Say, would you be able to do online banking without a vaccine passport? Maybe not. Say goodbye to your money. It's not just the oligarchs. The cowardly will demand the passport to demand you get it, Cowards need to feel safe above all things, and they don't care what they have to do, make you do to guarantee their feels. You might recall the war on terror led to body scanners at airports and other indignities such as computer tracking of your whereabouts by cell phone. Thanks, NSA, all of which was welcomed by cowards who wanted to feel safe. We've all read and seen historical examples of citizens welcoming and participating in bloody tyranny, always with the moral lesson that you, the viewer, would never allow yourself to fall that low. Yeah. Yes, once again, I don't want to hear ever again people railing against the German people and, oh, how did the German people, how were they brought to collaborate with this? Well, I guess they were pretty much like all people at all times. They are cowards, and they just want to get by. They just want to get by. But some good news from Florida. Governor DeSantis says he'll be taking executive action against vaccine passports. Well, if Biden is determined to nationalize this, then this sets the stage for a possible war between the United States and Florida. Briggs comments, if enough rulers can recall their duty, the passport will fail. If you two remember yours and refuse to use it when buying at Woke Coffee House and Megalo Walmart, it will fail. But if you say, what's the harm, it will succeed. Texas district judge upholds Austin mask mandate. Travis County remains committed to following the science and the advice of our health expert, says Andy Brown, Travis County Judge and Chief Executive. Today's court ruling allowing the health authorities' rules to remain in place and keep the mask requirements for business puts the health and safety of our public above all else during this pandemic. Andy Brown is a liar, as is typical for our beloved rulers. Here's the plot, which shows the science, and you can see weekly deaths in California, Texas, Florida, New York, North Dakota, and South Dakota just falling off a cliff everywhere. Surely you remember the great cries of death, death, it comes, after Texas announced it was restoring liberty it should never have taken away. Death is on vacation. Well, he had a busy year catching up with government solutions. And I guess in the final example of the new, well, I don't know, the monstrous regiment of women. No, I'll just get to that in a second. Here's a woman who seems sensible. Her name is Julie Kelly, and she writes for American Greatness. Exactly 1 year ago, Dr. Anthony Fauci joined President Trump in the Rose Garden to announce plans to extend the COVID-related lockdowns for another 30 days. Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx then presented doomsday models predicting more than 2 million of Americans would die of COVID-19 in a matter of months, and urged the president to keep the country shut down until the end of April. Trump, persuaded by the data, agreed. We feel that the mitigation we're doing right now is having an effect, Fauci said March 29th, 2020, referring to the initial 15 days to slow the spread initiative the White House announced March 16th. But the decision to prolong this mitigation process until the end of April, I think, was a wise and prudent decision. Fauci bragged that he and Birx pored over the data with the president, explained why they believed it was the best course of action. The president accepted it. At that moment, Trump officially handed over the reins of his once booming economy and his political future to two heartless, clueless incompetents who unfortunately remain in the spotlight to this day. The economic, educational, physical, and mental damage Fauci and Birx inflicted on the country will never be fully calculated, yet neither shows a hint of remorse for what they've done. And yet the virus is still here. In fact, in some areas such as New York and New Jersey, cases are again starting to rise despite more than a year of shutdowns, masking, and social distancing. So it's fitting that Fauci's year-long reign of terror, culminating in his suggesting a form of child abuse disguised as more mitigation strategies to fight the virus. Fauci told Face the Nation Sunday, when we talk about what you can do when you're vaccinated, you can certainly have members of a family if the adults are vaccinated and you're in the home with your child. You don't need to wear a mask and you can have physical contact. When the children go out into the community, you want them to continue to wear masks when they're interacting with groups from multiple households, unquote. Fauci also warned that maybe, just maybe, kids can play on playgrounds and attend camp this summer if everyone behaves themselves. When infection levels get down to what makes Fauci and his colleagues comfortable, Fauci explained, it is conceivable that you would have a great deal of flexibility during the summer, even with the children, with things like camps. It's rather similar to Joe Biden's promise, which has yet to be revoked, that if Americans are all good little boys and girls, he may let them have cookouts on Independence Day. Now, not very many people, but you may be allowed, to grill meat on Independence Day. Yeah, I hope people are looking forward to that. And I have to say that if Donald Trump had stuck with his original idea on how to combat COVID-19, that is to say, not to surrender to hysteria, he would still be president today. Not only does it require an audacious level of arrogance to tell tens of millions of parents without hesitation what their children can and cannot do, it signals a deep-seated malevolence toward the most helpless human beings, prohibiting children from participating in the fundamental joys of childhood while forcing them to wear dirty, dehumanizing face masks is physical and psychological child abuse. Fauci should be widely condemned for his remarks, and CBS News should be ashamed for giving voice to such abusive, unscientific advice. Let's deal with the facts, something Fauci seems uninterested in discussing, and Sunday talk show hosts seem uninterested in reporting. Children under 13 have the lowest infection rates of any age group and a near zero fatality rate. The death rate for people 85 and older is 7,900 times higher than the rate for children between 5 and 17. There is also no evidence children act as super spreaders, even in tight quarters such as schools. To the contrary, children act as a powerful living immunization force, denying the virus a place to land. That is to say, even when children get the virus, they can easily fight it off without suffering any debilitating symptoms, building immunity. One has to wonder how much closer we would be to herd immunity had we let our children live their normal lives instead of confining them to house arrest for months on end. Face masks for children have no known impact on reducing transmission. In fact, masking children has obvious downsides. Little people are messy, fidgety germ carriers, dirty hands, constantly fiddling with the mask covering isn't healthy for the child or the parent. God only knows what accumulates on the fabric mask of an average 7-year-old boy. Fauci's advice could very well be making people sick. Nor is it healthy for a child to have a depressed immune system deprived of the normal flow of oxygen, compounded by limited physical activity or sunshine. Contrary to what Dr. Fauci says, a sunny playground or summer camp filled with happy, on-the-move children is the very best thing for them. According to Summit News, fake vaccine passports are already being sold on the street. Entrepreneurship at work. This is from Tom Pappert at National File, and I think this pretty much sums up most of what I've been talking about today. At Idaho Falls District 91, and Idaho Falls District 91, and there's a word missing here, which is meeting, got heated when pro-mask Board of Trustees member Elizabeth Cogliatti became short of breath and struggled to speak while wearing a mask and also arguing for mandatory masks, prompting media to declare that she almost passed out while wearing the face mask. Well, I have seen the video. It's about 90 seconds long, and this woman seems very close to collapsing at the table. When Board of Trustees Chair Laura Hill declared that the mask mandate must remain because the CDC is recommending that all phases of schools reopening, no matter what the community transmission is like, is to continue masking so you can stay in school, she was questioned by an anti-mask member, Trustee Paul Hack, who asked how many times the CDC visited schools in the district. At this point, Cogliatti interrupted to say that the CDC does not visit schools, prompting Hack to respond, "Exactly, that's my point. They are creating regulations." Cogliatti responded, "You interrupted me, Paul. You interrupted me. Please do not interrupt me." At this point, Cogliatti appeared to have difficulty breathing through her pink face mask and began taking deep breaths and taking long pauses between words. They don't need to visit our school district to make recommendations for everyone. And they currently have recommendations out with the current level of transmission in Bonneville County that we should be in hybrid for the elementary schools and virtual for middle schools and high schools. And at this point, she says something like, I'm done, because she's been speaking for, 60 seconds uninterrupted, and that's all she is up to. Again, she seems to regard criticism of her position as a personal affront and thus intolerable. That's it for today. Let's have a final look at the chat. Okay. She had a Shatner cadence. Yes. Gasp. Steve says, gasp, must reach, face mask, joke. A year ago, we were making Fauci jokes. They're even less funny now. Okay. Have you seen clips of Fauci's appearance on the Halbermensch podcast? Try, guys. Oh, I just saw the introduction to that, where they're all hyperventilating in expectation and, giving those faces, the silent grin. It's really painful. Half Galician says Mark Levin calls them to face the nation and meet the depressed. These jokes are so hacky and so old. When I was a kid, literally back in the 60s, they were called Beat the Press and Mace the Nation. So, okay, I don't want to talk about the election, particular about balloting, for an obvious reason that I will be banned. Who knew Florida would become an oasis of sanity? Yes, I guess Florida man will have a whole new meaning. Ogan's Iron says, KMG, no monthly vaccine. Your digital money account is locked. To unlock, get vaxxed and spend $1,000 at registered black-owned business. Anwar says, if Florida wasn't such a humid and bug-infested swamp, I'd move there. Yeah, I got nothing against the people of Florida. It's just that the climate there just seems the very antipodes of what would be pleasant for me. Didn't they drop charges against Whitmer's kidnappers due to FBI informant? I will have to look that up. Thank you for that. KMG loves Starship Troopers, Total Recall, and RoboCop. What do you thinks of Basic Instinct? It's a very entertaining movie, and Sharon Stone is very good in it. I love the music. The script by that Harry fellow. I'm trying to remember his name. He was the king of screenwriters for several years. He's not a very good script writer, but the movie's still entertaining. Let's talk about what's coming up on the show. On Thursday, Theater Thursday, which is also Holy Thursday, I'm going to be discussing a movie about the Grail. It's by Eric Romer from 1978, and it's called Percival Le Gallois. On Good Friday, I'm going to be discussing Yves Lenoir's biography of Monsignor Ronald Knox. And next week, on Music Monday, I'm going to give you a little appreciation of my favorite songwriter, Hugo Wolf. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show, any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've not done so already. Thank you all who contributed to my plea for funding, or donations rather, a week and a half ago. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.